Okay, good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to our third Lunch and Learn of the season. Thank you for joining us. We appreciate it. We're excited to share our knowledge and hopefully take a few things away from this. This theme today is taking action on climate change and preparing for the future. My name is Tanner Stoffren. I am the Marketing and Communications Coordinator at Wild Rivers Conservancy. For those of you who are not familiar with us, we are the official nonprofit partner of the St. Croix National Scenic Riverway, and our mission is to inspire and forever ensure the rare ecological integrity of the St. Croix and Navikagan riverways. As a nonprofit, we depend on the support of individuals and businesses to carry out our mission throughout the watershed. If you are inspired by your learning today, please consider becoming a donor, volunteering, or attending one of our upcoming events. We will share that information with you in the chat as the program wraps up today. Before we begin, some housekeeping details. Obviously, you'll notice this is being recorded. This will be posted to our YouTube channel in the coming week for you to share or rewatch. If you do have questions, please put them in the chat functionality on Zoom here. We will circle back and have about 15 minutes of time for us to answer questions with Alexis towards the end. Now, it is my pleasure today to introduce my colleague, Alexis Monti. She is the Climate and Resiliency Specialist here at Wild Rivers Conservancy. She's been with us for a little over a year and came to the Midwest with a broad experience with spending time at University of Massachusetts Amherst and spending time down in Mississippi. Since then, she's brought a lot of perspective to our programs with the National Park Service. After all of that moving, she is excited to build roots in the Midwest and found a love for all outdoor activities has to offer. So with that, I will turn it over to Alexis, and she will share her presentation on climate resiliency in the Riverway.
Yeah, thank you so much, Tanner. Appreciate it. I'm gonna need access to screen sharing real quick. Thank you, Hannah and Tanner, for offering that soon. It's good. It gives me a moment to pull up my presentation anyways, so stay tuned, everyone. Yeah. Yep, just 1 minute, everyone. I'm just getting a notification saying participant screen sharing is not available. Oh, okay, it looks like something's changed. Okay, perfect. Thank you all for your patience. There we go. Let's get this into presenter mode. Gorgeous. Okay, let me just check. Perfect. Okay, so I think we're looking pretty good here, so I'm going to get started. But hi, everyone. Thank you so much for coming to my talk. This is Taking Action on Climate Change and Preparing for the Future with me, Alexis Monti. I work for Wild Rivers Conservancy. I see that screen sharing just pulled up, so I'm glad to see this is working. Okay, let's get this going. Perfect. So I'm under the impression we can all see this okay. If not, please let me know. But let's start out with climate change projections impacts. I just want to make sure we are all on the same page throughout the rest of this presentation. So I'm just going to spend the first 10 or so minutes just getting us there and just outlining what the projections are like and the impacts we're likely to experience will be. So first off, let's talk about where we are in the country, right? Because the entire US is going to have different impacts, and my presentation is very focused on this little region of Minnesota and Wisconsin. So we call it the St. Croix watershed. It's a wonderful little place. And I actually shouldn't be calling it little. I'll show you guys in a minute how big this actually is. But the St. Croix watershed, for those of us who might not be living in it right now or currently in it, is in between Duluth and Minneapolis, my apologies. And includes all these lovely cities. It is roughly 7,800 square miles of watershed, split pretty half and half between both states. It's about the size of New Jersey. Coming from the East Coast, that's a very useful fact for me. That really helps put in perspective how large this area really is. It includes the St. Croix and Namaquagan rivers, which are wild and scenic rivers, some of the most pristine rivers in the entire US. Got a very high ecosystem value and is mostly forested. This is an important fact because if you live in an urban area compared to a forested area, compared to anything in between, your response to climate change should be and will be very different, right? So we're looking at an area that's mostly forested. And then also 75% of the land here is owned by private landowners. So when we're looking at climate change, the people out here who are going to be impacted by these ecosystem impacts will be all of us, but also landowners who own this area, right? So, and we have to work with all of them to make sure that our watershed is prepared for climate change. So, and then as we've established, the watershed faces threats of climate change, as does the entire world, fragmentation, and then also development. So yeah, so that's where we are. And when I go into my projections for the rest of this presentation, I'll be focusing on this area. So, but there will be projections for the entire state and in some cases for the entire country. So if you're interested in different areas, there might be something for you there too. So let's get started on reading climate projections. This is something I went to school partially for, so I've been doing this for quite a while, but I understand that these graphs and maps aren't always like super intuitive. So I just want to go through really briefly, like just the general basics so we can all take a look at them together, right? So the map I just pulled up is a pretty common climate map, right? That I feel like I see all the time, but the general public probably doesn't, but it has a bunch of like very relevant information that I think the public should know. So I pulled this one up as a good example, right? But what we've got here, we've got temperature in Celsius, right? So I know in America, Celsius is kind of tricky, but it's the best we have for now. So we have temperature in Celsius, and then the years. So it's going from roughly 1995 to 2100, so a 100-year time span. And then it's showing us the temperature in a year depending on these RCPs, right? And so what does an RCP mean? Like I said, I went to school for environmental science, and even I didn't know what this was even like a year or two ago, right? So what is an RCP? It's a representative concentration pathway. Does that help? Not necessarily, I don't think. So what exactly is a representative concentration pathway, right? So what are we still talking about? So essentially an RCP is a scenario, and science has 4 main scenarios that they like to look at. And these scenarios are essentially how the world could look depending on what actions we take now, right? So right now we're in 2020. This is where we are. All of these lines are still kind of converged at that point. And depending on the actions we take in 2020, 2030, in the coming years, we could end up in these different scenarios, right? So in this presentation, I'm going to talk about RCP 4.5, which is the moderate emission scenario. So this is a scenario where the world says, okay, climate change is happening. We don't want to have all these severe impacts, so we're going to take action. So in RCP 4.5, the world is taking action and our emissions peak, our carbon emissions will peak in roughly 2040 and then decline. And from there, it shows us like the average temperature we'll experience if we make those changes. RCP 8.5, so the highest one, right, is talking about what happens if the world continues as usual. We say climate change is happening, but we love the way we're running the world right now. We don't want to reduce our carbon. Like, it's just business as usual, right? So our RCP 8.5 just shows us the baseline of if we don't take action. And I just think it's really incredible to see the difference between these 2 scenarios. And it really shows us just like how our action, how actions can play a big role in what temperatures we'll see, especially if we take action now. So let's give a layout of the land. So climate in the region, right? So what are we going to experience? What do we pretty much know is going to happen? Well, we're going to have warming temperatures. We've already felt that, especially this past winter. I feel like one thing a lot of people haven't heard necessarily is that, yes, the world is warming, but it's going to be warming at different degrees in like different seasons, right? So in Minnesota and Wisconsin, we're actually going to be warming more in the winter and overnight than we are in the summer. It's not going to be like standard 3 degrees across seasons. So that could play a big role in why this winter was so incredibly warm. Maybe not. It was also El Nino year, so maybe there's that. But We're also going to be experiencing extreme precipitation swings, so that's going to be more severe droughts and also more severe floods. I will go into that a little further and explain how we can have both droughts and floods, but we're likely to experience more extreme precipitation. So we're also going to have reduced ice cover and shortened ice duration. Again, we saw this past winter and are likely to continue experiencing reduced ice cover, maybe not as severe as this past winter, but we're going to continue experiencing that into the future. We're going to have a longer growing season. So this is the amount of days that plants have to grow. That's likely to get longer, especially if our winters start to feel shorter, right? Our hardiness zones are going to move north. We're going to have increased invasive species pressure and a longer allergy and tick season, among many other impacts. And please note, I have slides on all of these, so I'll go into that a little further too, especially like hardiness zones and things that are a little less common knowledge. And then I do want to show this awesome map. This is one of my favorite climate maps out there. And I feel like this just summarizes what I just showed in these bullet points very well. But essentially what this map is trying to say. And it was made by University of Maryland. So they did a fantastic job doing this for the entire US. But essentially what this map is saying is we're taking modern day Minneapolis. And what it's saying is by 2080, Minneapolis will look like modern day Missouri / Kansas if we don't take any changes. This is for RCP 8.5. So this is if we don't take action on climate change and don't reduce our emissions. So if you've been to Missouri or Kansas in recent years, please like reflect on that experience, because that's what Minnesota could look like in only 60 or so years, or could feel like in 60 or so years. And then if you're curious what it looks like if we do take action, this map also captures that, just not in this photo, and it looks more like Iowa. So if you're from there, have been there, we could be heading in that direction. So that's the lay of land. Let's go into a little deeper. I'm not gonna talk your ear off too much, hopefully, about the deep science of the maps and whatnot. But essentially what we're getting at is Minnesota's getting hotter, and we can definitely see that just from the colors of this map, right? So we've got historical data from like 1980 to 2010, so a 30-year time span. And we're going to look at another 30-year time span of 2040 to 2060, right? So we've got the moderate emission scenario, right? So this is if we make changes and if we don't make changes. And so what this map is trying to say is in the past, we had 5 to 10 days per year over 90 degrees. So it's pretty hot, right? And then in 20 to 30 years, we could be experiencing 20 to 30 days per year, or even 25 to 40 days per year. So we're going from like a week or so of temperatures like that to potentially a month or so of temperatures above the 90s, right? That's a large change. Luckily, we have like air conditioning and whatnot as people, but our wildlife and plants don't have that. And so that plays a big role into how our environment as a whole is going to change, most likely. So, and then similar to Minnesota, Wisconsin's going to get hotter. Most of our maps are going to be very similar across the states. So there's that. Minnesota has a few more maps, so they're going to look a little different, but the data is the same. So what this map is saying is from that same time span, but in the scenario where we don't take changes, we're going to go from roughly 5 to 15 days over 90 degrees to 25 to 35. So again, we're going from like a week to like almost a month of temperatures over 90 degrees. So big changes, right? And that's really not that far away. That's like 20, 30 years from now. So same thing with precipitation. So we've got similar maps. So Minnesota is getting wetter. What I really like about this map though is with heat, it was like a very drastic change. Like we saw it go from like that light yellow to deep red. With precipitation, a lot of the maps actually look quite similar, right? So you've got a lot of the same colors. Sure, things are moving up in range, but they're not like a super drastic change like with heat, right? So under the same kind of time span, same scenarios, right? We're going from 3 to 8 days per year with over 1 inch of rain. And then we're going to just 3 to 9 days per year of over 1 inch per rain in both scenarios. So within our watershed, at least. And so what I want to note is not everything will change drastically, so we can take some comfort in that, right? But I also want to note that this map does not show when the rain will fall. It just shows that there's not going to be signaling huge drastic changes in the amount of rain, right? So what the stats I've been reading have been saying is rain's more likely to fall in winter and spring and less so in the summer. And so if we have more rain in winter and spring, that could be like more like heavier rain events, heavier snow events when we do get snow. And then in the summer, we could have heavier drought events, right? Or longer drought events, more severe, you know what I mean? So that's a very interesting nuance, I think, to precipitation data. Same kind of thing with Wisconsin. Wisconsin's gonna get wetter. The difference is not very different, very large, right? It's going from 6 to 7 days to 7 to 8 days in a 20 to 30 year time span. Again, doesn't show when the rain will fall, and that plays a huge impact in how we live our lives out here. So another awesome map right here. So this is illustrating growing season, so the amount of days that plants have to grow throughout the year. This applies to the entire US, which I really appreciate. But what this map is showing is the same time spans we've been talking about for the earlier map. And then for the dark map, it's talking about 2070 to 2090. So this is now 50 or so years into the future. So we're going a little further in time. What's unfortunate is a lot of climate maps don't have the same time spans. So unfortunately, I can't show you a consistent time span, but hopefully you find this one interesting as well. But what it's showing is we originally went from like 2 to 3.5 months per year growing season, right, in 1980 to 2009. And we're going to go to roughly 3.5 to 6 months per year in 2070 to 2099, which is nearly a double difference, almost more than double in some cases, right? And so that's huge because we live in a very forested state. It's going to impact everything within our ecosystems around here. And especially if you have a career, say like farming or something like that, or even if you garden, it doesn't need to be a career or even just a hobby. It will impact that as well. So that's something we're looking at. There's also plant hardiness zones. So if you garden, you've probably seen this map. The USDA just updated their hardiness zone map to shift those zones. But essentially what a plant hardiness zone is it's an area. So I should have made this map a little bigger, but it's an area, say like this lighter purple, that is determined by extreme winter lows, right? So this area determines what plants can live where. So I've got a photo of my farm share this past year, and some of these plants might not be able to survive such extreme winter lows. So maybe they'll grow in this region instead of up here, right? So the plant hardiness zone just kind of determines what plants can grow where. So here's another really cool map, similar to the one I just showed. It's another sliding scale map that shows how the hardiness zones are going to change. But essentially, currently we are in zones 5A and 4A, which I just learned because I started gardening this past year. And in the high emission scenario where we don't make any changes, right, this could change to zone 6 and 7 in 50 years. And just to reiterate one of those maps from earlier in the slide, so this is what we are now, we're in the dark blue. But in the future, we could be in these light greens, right? So you see how it changes here. And the light greens of current day is pretty much Kansas, Missouri. So that's just more data showing how we might be similar to Kansas and Missouri within the next 50 to 60 years, right? I'm not saying we're going to be the same, but there's potential commonalities between each state, right? So yeah, just to break down the summary a little further, currently our minimum temperatures hit like roughly the -30s. In 50 to 60 years, that might look more like 0 to 10, which plays a huge impact for things like the little emerald ash borer, an invasive species that are currently boxed out of Minnesota due to our cold temperatures, Minnesota and Wisconsin. As our temperatures warm, that will increase opportunities for new species to kind of enter our state. So. And then this is, I think, my last map. So thank you guys for powering through that. But here's farm crop yields. This is a fun map to show because green is showing an increase in farm crop yields, which many people would determine as like good. And so this is just a fun map to show because I want to iterate that climate change isn't necessarily all bad. I'm using air quotes because good and bad, it depends on who you are. And so this is just one of those things that's actually expected to increase and could benefit certain people in the region, right? So it's saying crop yields, regardless of if we make a change or not, like take action on climate change, is expected to increase in the Midwest by 3 to 15%. Now I wouldn't leave this presentation saying, okay, well, maybe I'll go look into farming, right? Which don't expect anyone to do necessarily, but I wouldn't leave this presentation thinking that, because any fields that rely especially on nature or plants or anything like that, or just like very heavily on the environment, will also have to deal with the extreme weather and all those extra factors that I just mentioned. So, but I just wanted to show this one because I feel like a lot of people would see this and say that is good for our region. And again, climate change is not all anxiety-inducing bad things, right? It's just different. So again, I hope from all those maps you've gathered that everything's connected, right? So we've got longer growing season, which means we might have we will have longer allergy season, longer tick season. We're going to have different species coming into the state. So there's a couple invasive species here, different diseases that might be impacting our plants or fungi. It's going to impact when tourists come to our state, right? So if it's 90 degrees constantly for a good portion of the summer, maybe we'll have less people in the summer, but more in the fall or in the winter, because we'll have less bitterly severe winters, right? So yeah, it's all connected. Where you might put your property, like where you want to live, might change depending on how the climate looks in 20, 30, 40, 50 years, right? So yeah, we are all in this together, and we are all going to be experiencing the impacts in various ways through every aspect of our life, most likely. So I don't know if those slides, inspired hope or caused anxiety, but in case it caused either, I just want to go into the fact that there is still hope, and we can take action. So if you were a little anxious, please know that is not set in stone. A lot of those impacts I just talked about, like, we can take action to make it so the changes are less severe. And we can still see a semblance of the world we have today, right? So there's two main actions when it comes to taking action, right? So there's mitigation and there's adaptation, right? So mitigation are the actions that reduce greenhouse gas emissions, right? So we're pumping all this carbon into the atmosphere. Mitigation are going to be the actions that either remove carbon or just stop carbon from being emitted into the atmosphere. So that would be like renewable energy. Yeah, I'll give more examples actually in a short minute about mitigation, but that would be renewable energy and different things like that. Then we have adaptations. So those are actions that plan for and respond to the impacts of climate change. So adaptations essentially saying climate change is going to happen. It is happening, and we know these impacts. We know it's going to get warmer. So adaptation is saying, okay, we're going to plan for those changes now, so we're ready for them as they get more severe in the future, right? Again, I'll have more examples of both these in a minute, but that's just the general breakdown. So to the next slide, mitigation. Let's start with that, right? So mitigation, right now, some of the best examples I have of that are just like lifestyle choices. I want to iterate that small actions really do add up. And I feel like we all internally know this, especially if we vote, because a single vote doesn't make a huge difference usually, but if a bunch of people do it, you can make large changes and whatnot. So I just want to say it's kind of like this, right? The lifestyle choices you make up, especially if you inspire others to follow through with that as well. So what are some changes, choices, etc. we can do? Well, got this nifty graphic, but I'm going to break it down in bullet points too in case it's hard to read. But we could try shopping local. So that would be like farmers markets, CSAs with their local farms, co-ops. This is a really accessible option for where we live, frankly, because there are so many farmers markets and farms in the area that we can perhaps get our produce from, or our dairy or things like that. So we just want to do that because if you shop local, you keep like the money in the community, right? And you build those connections. Also, if you shop from far away, right? If you shop and you get your peppers from China or something like that, then all that needs to be transported to the US, and there's a bunch of emissions associated with that. So keeping your circle small keeps the emissions small as well, and helps us avoid added emissions. So that's pretty awesome, and it's a great way to support your local community. There's reuse. This is another great option for this watershed, frankly, because there's so many antique stores I've noticed out here and thrift shops, but there's all these crazy stats out there right now about, say, clothes, for example. There's one that says we have enough clothes already existing on the planet to clothe the entire to put clothes on everybody 6 times over, right? So we have 6 times the wardrobes we really need already existing, right? So I like to pitch reuse because in a lot of ways we already have what we need. And so if we can just shop secondhand, we can kind of slow the production, slow the emissions that are being caused by all this extra manufacturing that's not necessarily needed. So, and it's a good way to save money and find really neat items. So then there's donate. So similar to what I was just saying, if you're already at the thrift store, might as well donate some of the things you don't need anyways. You'd be surprised by the things people want and need. So don't trash anything that has already life left in it. You know, the best thing we can do is just keep things running like in our society. So just keep using things till you can't use them no more. So I recommend saving on trips, so planning your errands efficiently. So that would kind of just be like, if you're going into the cities one day, maybe just spend like the whole day in the cities doing all the errands you need instead of going back there all the time, right? Saves transportation emissions and saves time as well, and could be kind of fun. So I recommend creating green space. So this could be a pollinator garden, purchasing rain barrels for said garden, composting, just kind of fostering that love for green space as well. But yeah, in doing so, you kind of are able to A, keep things local, and B, you can provide habitat, you can have a garden, you can reduce emissions from throwing away food, like all kinds of things. So create green space wherever and whenever you can. There's ride sharing. I understand public transport is very difficult in the watershed. So unless you live in the cities, so I know that one's not super easy, but if you can do it, I recommend. Again, saves on gas emissions, right? So you're not emitting carbon in that way. Creative cooking. Food waste has another one of those crazy facts where like a ridiculous amount of, I think it's like 45% of food in America is wasted. I think that's the stat. It might be 35%. Don't quote me too hard, but essentially like that's a really interesting stat because food waste, when you throw it away in the landfill, it creates this gas called methane, which is significantly worse than carbon, right? So if you can just get creative with cooking and reduce your food waste, that actually would play a huge role in reducing our emissions as Americans. So get outside and foster that love for the outdoors. That limits electricity use and any emissions with that, and then also gets you outside, which is a perk, good for your mental health and all of that. But that's another one. And then there's a couple that don't have like their own circles, I guess, on the poster next door, but I want to recommend advocating as well. So voting for people that have clear climate agendas, voting for people that, care for the environment and things like that, plays a major role in how America will be able to reduce our emissions. So there's a couple of really cool organizations too that will help you figure out who has what climate goals on their agendas. So renewable energy, I'm not going to talk too much about that in this presentation, but that's just another way to reduce your emissions is engaging with solar, wind, etc. And then another big one is just start the conversation. So I would love if any of you who are in this topic today, who are in this lunch and learn today, go and talk to someone about it later on today. Like just get the conversation started about climate change or the impacts you saw. Like just tell someone at dinner one of the crazy facts I just mentioned in my maps, right? And just get the conversation flowing. I feel like that's probably one of the best pieces of advice of this entire list is just talk and see where the conversation takes you, right? But that's a fun one. And then get creative. I'm just going to highlight this really quickly, but we all have our own skills that we can use to address the climate crisis. Like I'm not good at knitting or anything like that, but my roommate is, and she's making a temperature blanket. She's knitting the temperature every day, right? And making a blanket that we can show people later on, saying like this is what the climate looked like for 2024, right? So yeah, use whatever skills you have. There's a bunch of examples online of just like really nifty projects people are doing. So that's another way where you can kind of mitigate your emissions. Is just spread the word, right? Get creative. Because I work in forestry, I'm also going to pitch land stewardship as well, because I feel like this is, it's such a heavily forested watershed that this is an area that a lot of us could probably implement practices from. But there's a couple things we can do. So there's putting in rain gardens on your property. So that's planting plants that absorb a lot of water, and that could help with the extreme precipitation we'll have, right? Keeps your lawns from flooding, things like that, right? You could put in native landscaping that'll help wildlife species that are going to be stressed by the increasing temperatures and different changes, right? You could put in pollinator habitat, which will also help our wildlife and whatnot. And then if you live in Minnesota, I recommend checking out the Lawns to Legumes project. That will help fund that pollinator habitat. So check that out if you live there. There's also permanent land protection for any of you with bigger properties who are looking to make like a big change, right? And so in these programs, you could turn your property into like a permanently protected area that can never be developed. So that's via fee title acquisition and conservation easements. So if you own a lot of land, check those out. And then some of you may have heard of carbon credits online. I think it's been picked up by the news a lot lately, and there's a lot of just talk about it in the political sphere and all of that. But there's a program that's now in Minnesota and Wisconsin called the Family Forest Carbon Program, where if you own property, you could enroll your land in carbon credits and get paid that way. So where essentially businesses could pay you to keep your land forested and absorbing carbon. So that's another fun way to use your resources to mitigate climate change on an individual basis. So, okay. So if you enjoyed mitigation, hopefully you enjoy adaptation as well. So this is, again, the kind of way where you're looking at climate change. You're saying it's already happening. What can I do now to make myself more resilient to the climate of the future, right? So adaptation's preparing you for the future, kind of. So this is going to be focused on forests in some ways, just to kind of illustrate the example a bit more, but I will tie it into more examples later on of what you can do even if you don't own land. So I don't own land, so this presentation is kind of for everybody, but please note that the next couple of slides are kind of related to forestry, because that's the other intersection of my work. So you're really seeing a lot of my job today, but anyways, there's three main options with adaptation when it comes to forests. And again, it's to illustrate the concept and for any landowners with forests. But essentially, there's resistance, resilience, and transition. And I'll kind of break down this graphic a little bit. But essentially, when you're looking to adapt, there's a couple ways to do it. So you could resist the changes of climate change, right? So you've got your lovely forest here. I hope you guys can see my points here, but you've got your lovely forest here. You don't want it to change, so you put a little like protective bubble around it, right? And the resistance strategy is essentially saying like, I will put my time and resources and money and etc. into keeping this the same. So you'll manage it in such a way that keeps the same tree species around. You'll put in, maybe like a berm or something to keep some of the water out, and you just try to keep the conditions as similar as possible to what they are today, and kind of like fight back against climate change, right? So that one can be really costly, especially into the future, but I'll talk a little more about that in a minute. Then there's resilience, right? So this is a really nifty, this is like the good middle ground, right? So this is saying like, okay, I've got a forest right here. Climate change is going to happen, so it'll probably maybe take out a couple of my trees. And so what I might do is plant trees that are going to be climate resilient, right? Trees that are expected to do really well with the new heat and the changes in precipitation. And so you kind of allow for some degrees of change, but you try to protect what you've got, but also prepare for the future. So you plant some new things that will be better suited for the future. And then there's transition, which is just saying like, okay, climate change is going to happen. The trees I have right now are not going to do well. So I'm just going to cut everything down and plant only things that are going to do well with climate change. So it's really risky in the near term, but if it works, then it works really well. And like the forest thrives, right? So in transition approaches, you're intentionally changing everything or facilitating change to make it kind of prepared for the climate of the future. So yeah, there's like no change, middle change, and then big change, right? So like I was saying, we've got resistance right here. So if you've got, say, property maybe, and you really love your small piece of property and you want it to stay the same, you want to see, your birches or your pine trees, something like that, and you want to see those same species, well, you can put time, money, and people into it to keep it that way into the future. Just knowing that as time goes on, that will get harder and harder to do, and we'll use more resources, time, money, etc., to keep it that way. But that is one approach people do for like especially important areas, right? So areas that are maybe smaller in scale, or areas that are just like have significance in people's lives. So like a lot of significance in people's lives. An example of resilience. So this is another kind of natural resource-based example, but essentially resilience can be shown by saying like prairies, right? So prairies are fire-based ecosystems. And one way to adapt prairies to climate change is balance. So if prairies need fire to thrive, then one way to help them adapt is to continue to put fire on them every couple of years. Like just give them all the resources they need to stay strong. So that way when those wildfire events do come through, like the prairies are fine, they can rebound, right? Or when drought comes through, the prairie's already strong, right? Because you've been managing it to make it strong. And that way it'll be able to bounce back even when it's hit with challenges. So yeah, that's a beautiful prairie right there. And then another fun way to improve, another fun way to support resilience is to use diversity to improve resilience. So we're leaving the prairie example for a moment, but essentially what we want to do is don't put all of your eggs in one basket. And this applies both to natural resources and to like our careers and societies as a whole. But the more diverse we are, the better we are to handle the changes that are going to come from climate change, right? So don't put all of your eggs in one basket. Why do I say that? Because say in forestry, for example, say you've got all these different trees. There's going to be climate change winners and losers, and we can't, despite how good our maps are, we can't predict in the future perfectly who will be those winners and losers. Like we don't fully know exactly what the world will look like. We just have theories, right? So if you have a bunch of different things on your property, maybe a bunch of income sources, maybe a bunch of different tree species, just like a diverse array of whatever you're looking at, that will better prepare you in the future. So that way you have to have winners and you maybe have to have losers, but at the very least you have something remaining. And this is just a way to illustrate that. So we go from our ashes and elms getting hit with disease from climate change, but we still have, say, oaks and maples on our properties, right? So again, diversity is like the best advice I have for adaptation, frankly. And then again, if we're on a property, I'd encourage diverse species, diverse tree sizes, plant sizes, etc., and diverse ages. So just get as diverse as you can, and that'll help. And then again, the last kind of adaptation strategy here is transition. So actively encourage change. So many of you might know what this bug is right here, but in case you don't, it's the emerald ash borer. This is an invasive species that is actively killing our ash trees in Minnesota and Wisconsin. It's got like a 99% kill rate, which is honestly tragic, but there are things that both states are doing to kind of combat that. And so in a transition approach, what we could do is say, okay, climate change is making it easier for emerald ash borer to live in Minnesota and Wisconsin. And so this bug is now moving further and further north. And so transition approach is saying like, okay, I've got ash trees on my property. Emerald ash borer is going to come because climate change is making it easier for that to happen. So what you could do is cut down your ash trees, right? Use the wood for something beautiful, something like that, and then replant oak trees in that place, right? This bur oaks and other oak trees are expected to do very well in this region with climate change. So a transition approach would be just changing the landscape you have now to make it better adapted to the landscape of the future, which is a fun approach in some ways. And yeah, there's emerald ash borer. So if what I just said kind of struck a chord and you're like, oh yeah, that sounds like a good idea, I just want to iterate that there are a couple of resources for you available. There's the Climate Change Atlas where you can look up any tree and it will tell you where that tree is expected to live with climate change. So if you have any interest in that, please check that out. And then if you live in Minnesota, there's Minnesota DNR's resource about best native yard trees for a changing climate, where they specifically tell you what trees will do well in your region. So they did the research for you, so just check those out. But I'm not going to harp too much on those. So anyways, this is kind of back to what any day citizen can do. I know a lot of that was forestry focused, but like if you're anybody who lives around here, these are things you can do probably. So best general practices. I would recommend getting involved. There's a lot of ways to do this. So I've illustrated a few here. But for example, you could get involved with volunteering, right? So if you want to take a stance on climate change and take action, these are things you could do, right? So for example, Wild Rivers, we offer volunteering throughout the watershed. So if you live around here, you could help us collect native plants at, say, like sea prairies and whatnot. You could help us remove garlic mustard, which would help native species survive, because garlic mustard is invasive and stresses forest ecosystems out a lot. You could help us plant trees to suck up some carbon. So if you have any interest in that, please check out our website. And then even if you don't live in the watershed, there's a bunch of other ways you can get involved via volunteering. A lot of towns, nonprofits, educational institutions, churches, programs, etc., offer volunteering. So please just check out what's in your area and see what works for you. And then there's also community science, which is similar to volunteering, but not quite. There's all these apps, iNaturalist, CocoRa's, Forest Fungi Project, that you can get involved with. iNaturalist helps scientists find what plants live in what areas, which will be really interesting as the climate changes and plants expand their ranges. So you could get involved that way. CocoRa's enables you to take a rain gauge. You can monitor precipitation in your area using just a rain gauge in your yard, and scientists use that. Forest Fungi Project helps you identify fungi that live in the forests. Water quality monitoring, that one's pretty self-explanatory, but these are all things the scientific community needs, and you are able to kind of help make your little change with climate change just by enrolling in that, if none of the earlier options sounded appealing, right? So there's a lot of ways to get involved. Please check that out. You can also engage with resources. I'm not going to go into this one too deep, but there's a bunch of resources out there for you, depending on what you're looking for. This is just a really nifty resource about maple syruping and how you can adapt that practice to climate change. And I would have thought that would have been kind of niche, but the resources exist. So please check that out. If you have any industries you work in, essentially, there might be resources available to you kind of connecting climate change to whatever industry or hobby you have. So there's additional resources about a lot of what I've just talked about, especially in the natural resources realm. Not going to go into those, just letting you know that these resources exist for you to check out. And then the last thing is just stay engaged. So don't let this talk be the last thing you do with climate change, right? I hope this inspires you with hope, right? And so just please sign up for our newsletters, attend our events, keep learning. You don't have to do this specifically with Wild Rivers, right? Although I'd love if you did, but there's just so many resources available to you to kind of find your community. So check out those newsletters and just stay with us. And with that, does anyone have any questions? I hope that wasn't too much of an info dump, but I'm excited to talk to you all about anything and everything to do with climate. So thank you all for being here.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Alexis. I love how you're able to break down the complicated science and make that easy and digestible for all the listeners today. I think that's really one of the important facets of explaining climate change and getting the community buy-in, is making it easy for everybody to understand. We have time, about 10 minutes for questions, so please use the chat functionality. It's a little talk bubble at the bottom of your screen. Type out a question if anything came to mind. I have a couple I'll ask Alexis here to get us started as you type a few in the chat. You mentioned that climate change is typically labeled as all bad. But that sometimes is a misconception. Are there a few things that gives you some hope?
Yeah, for sure. So yeah, exactly. So one of the things about climate change, when I was saying oh, it's labeled all bad, right? Is it depends so heavily on who you are, for one, as well. Climate change is going to benefit some people and some industries much more than it does others. And so I feel like that provides some hope as a whole, because maybe you do work in those industries that will be benefiting from this, right? Maybe you work in renewable energy, which is going to get probably a lot more traction shortly. It's already on a very high projection at whatever. It's already doing very well. But some of the things that give me hope is that map in the very, very beginning of my presentation, right, where it shows the different scenarios, right? And it shows that where we are, they're all kind of converged right now. And so what gives me hope is the fact that if we take action now, we can prevent the worst scenarios. Like there's still a little bit of time for us to collectively, as like a world of people, get together and take action against climate change. So a lot of those maps I showed you today, like, don't necessarily need to happen. We still have the time, and the action, the motivation to make it so they're less severe, so we don't have to deal with those impacts we've been talking about, right? So climate change will still happen though, just maybe hopefully we can make it less severe. But I have hope for us.
But that's important. I do too.
Yes.
You mentioned landowners can look at their land and the forest health and what trees are present, and maybe set a plan for how resilient or adaptive that plot of land may be. If I was a landowner listening today and I did not know how to go about that, and or didn't have the time or energy to put into that, is there options out there for somebody to get a plan or learn how their land may adapt?
Yeah, absolutely. I have a bunch of resources on that, but so although my job's climate resiliency specialist, like that's the title, a lot of my work has to do with forestry. So if you are interested in if you're a landowner, I'm speaking to the public now, right? But if you're a landowner and some of this really struck a chord, like reach out to me with like your specific interests, and I could find whatever you need in that field related to climate change and forestry. If you don't want to reach out to me, that's okay too. I promise I don't bite, but there is like the Minnesota DNR offers stewardship plans you could go fill out. Wild Rivers Conservancy, we have a satellite website called My Sanctuary Woods, where there's a form you could fill out where I could send you all the resources you could ever want and need relating to topics of your interest. So there's a bunch of organizations out there to help you. So we just need to know who you are, basically, and we'll take it from there. So.
Right. Doesn't look like anybody else has pasted any questions in. So we'll give it just one last second here, and then I'll start our wrap up. All right, in the interest of time and get everybody back to work, or if you're lucky enough to be retired, a beautiful day to get outdoors. I want to thank you, Alexis, for sharing your knowledge and time with us today. I know I get to see it every day in the office and out in the field, but I appreciate you sharing your knowledge with our supporters and listeners. Before you go, please take a moment to fill out a survey link we're pasting in the chat box right now. It just takes 1 minute, but it helps us further shape and plan our upcoming education-based programming, what topics you want to learn more about, do not want to learn about, etc. We really appreciate that. You will also find a link to our upcoming events. So that's really the best way to get in contact and connect with us in person. We love sharing our knowledge and passion for the Riverway. I mentioned earlier, as the program started, Friday, May 3rd, we have our Wild Rivers Fest at 45th Parallel. It's free to attend, open door event with industry experts, manufacturers, kayak outfitters, hiking leaders, that sort of thing. Everything you need to have a blast and make the most of your summer in the Riverway will be present, and we hope to see you there. So with that, I want to thank you, Alexis, and everybody enjoy the rest of your day.
Thanks.